My 8-year-old son said from his hospital bed, "Dad, I'm going to heaven soon." Holding back tears. "I can't protect you anymore, so please, run away." When I asked why, he replied, "Look in my school locker. You'll understand why." When I checked his locker, I called the cops, but they refused to help me because... Before we continue, subscribe to Infidelity Tales Lab channel and let US know where you're listening from in the comments. My name is Cody Gross, and I thought I knew what hell looked like until I sat beside my 8-year-old son Danny's hospital bed, watching the machines keep him alive. The doctor said it was acute liver failure, sudden, severe, and with no clear cause. Danny had always been healthy, energetic, the kind of kid who could eat dirt and bounce back stronger than ever. But now he looked so small against those white sheets, tubes running in and out of his tiny body like he was some kind of broken machine they were trying to fix. "Dad," Danny whispered, his voice barely audible over the steady beep of the monitors. His eyes, once bright blue like his mother's, now held a weight no child should ever carry. "I'm going to heaven soon." I gripped the metal rail of his bed until my knuckles went white. "Don't say that, buddy. You're going to be fine. The doctors are working on." "No, Dad." He reached out with his small hand, the one without the four, and touched my arm. His skin felt paper-thin and cold. "I can't protect you anymore, so please, run away." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Protect me? My 8-year-old son thought he was protecting me? From what? "Danny, what are you talking about? Protect me from what?" Tears started rolling down his pale cheeks. "I'm sorry, Dad. I try to keep you safe, but I'm too tired now. I can't eat your food anymore. I can't drink your coffee." He was getting agitated, the heart monitor speeding up. "Look at my school locker. Combination is 0418, your birthday. You'll understand why." A nurse rushed in, alerted by the machines. "Sir, I need you to step back. His vitals are spiking." I was pushed aside as medical staff swarmed around my son. Through the chaos, I heard Danny's weak voice one more time. "Locker 247. Be careful, Dad. They're watching." That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in the hospital corridor, replaying Danny's words over and over. "You've been eating my food? Drinking my coffee? Why would he say that? And what did he mean they were watching?" My wife, Brittany, had gone home around midnight, claiming she needed rest. She'd been strangely calm throughout this whole ordeal, almost detached. When the doctors first told us about Danny's condition, she didn't break down like I did. She just nodded, asked a few clinical questions, and started making phone calls to handle the situation. At 3 a.m., I made a decision. Danny's elementary school was only 20 minutes away. Security was minimal, a few cameras and a night watchman who spent most of his time sleeping in the main office. I'd helped with enough school events to know the building's layout like the back of my hand. The custodial entrance was my way in. I noticed during a parent-teacher conference that the lock was loose, probably hadn't been properly fixed in years. A few minutes with a credit card, and I was inside the empty hallways. Lincoln Elementary after dark was eerily quiet, my footsteps echoing off the polished floors. I made my way to the 5th grade wing, where Danny's locker sat among dozens of others, each decorated with stickers and photos that spoke of childhood innocence. Locker 247. The combination lock felt cold under my fingers as I entered 0418, April 18th, my birthday. How did Danny know my birthday when Brittany barely remembered it anymore? The lock clicked open. Inside, instead of the usual collection of school supplies and forgotten lunch containers, I found something that made my blood run cold. There was a small digital camera, the kind kids weren't supposed to have at school. Beneath, it was a manila envelope thick with photographs and a notebook filled with Danny's careful, 8-year-old handwriting. I grabbed everything and headed to my truck, my hands shaking so badly I could barely start the engine. Back in a hospital parking lot, under the harsh glow of a streetlight, I opened Danny's notebook with trembling hands. The first page made me want to vomit. Daddy Protection Journal. Day 23. Mom put the white powder in Daddy's coffee again this morning. I poured it out when she wasn't looking and made new coffee. She got mad and asked why Daddy's coffee was cold. I said I accidentally knocked it over. She made new coffee with more white powder. I drank half of it when Daddy wasn't looking. It tasted really bitter and made my tummy hurt, but Daddy can't get sick. I flipped through page after page of entries dating back 3 months. Danny had been systematically intercepting poisoned food and drinks meant for me, consuming them himself to keep me safe. My 8-year-old son had been slowly killing himself to protect me. The photographs were worse. Danny had been secretly documenting everything with the camera he'd somehow acquired. There were images of Brittany mixing white powder into my morning coffee. Pictures of her injecting something into my lunch sandwiches with a syringe. Photos of her adding drops from a small vial into my beer bottles. But the most damning evidence was in the final set of photographs. Brittany wasn't working alone. The images showed my wife in the kitchen with Wilson Morrison, my best friend since college, my business partner, the man I trusted with my life and my family. He was handing her small packages, instructing her on dosages, even helping her prepare the poison meals. One photo showed them kissing passionately over my contaminated coffee pot. The final entry in Danny's journal, dated just 2 days ago, broke what was left of my heart. Day 89, I'm really sick now. My pee is dark and my skin looks yellow. Daddy notices I don't eat much anymore, but I can't tell him why. I heard Mom and Uncle Wilson talking about how the poison should have worked by now. They don't know I've been taking it instead. Tomorrow they're going to use more. I don't think I can drink anymore, but I have to try. I love you, Daddy. I hope you never have to read this. I sat in my truck, crying like I hadn't cried since I was a child myself. My son was dying because my wife and best friend had been trying to murder me. For 3 months, Danny had been my unwitting guardian angel, sacrificing his own life to save mine. With shaking hands, I called 911. 911, what's your emergency? I need to report an attempted murder and child endangerment. My wife and her accomplice have been poisoning me, and my son intercepted the poison and is now dying in the hospital. Sir, I'm going to transfer you to Detective Wilson Morrison. He handles all poison-related cases in this jurisdiction. My blood turned to ice. Wait, did you say Wilson Morrison? Yes, sir, Detective Morrison. He's our specialist in these types of cases. Please hold. The line went quiet. Then I heard that familiar voice. The voice of the man who'd been my best man at my wedding, who'd held Danny when he was born, who'd been systematically trying to kill me while sleeping with my wife. Cody? That you, buddy? Wilson's voice was perfectly calm, almost amused. I heard you've got some concerns about poisoning. That's a pretty serious accusation. You bastard, I whispered into the phone. I know everything. I have evidence. Photos, journals, everything. Wilson chuckled. Evidence? What evidence? Sounds like you're having some kind of breakdown, friend. The stress of your son's illness is probably getting to you. Sometimes grieving parents imagine all sorts of conspiracies when they can't accept the reality of a sick child. Danny has been drinking the poison meant for me. He documented everything. An 8-year-old's fantasy notebook isn't evidence, Cody. And even if it were, well, I'm the lead detective on poison cases. Any evidence would have to go through me first. Shame if it got lost or contaminated, don't you think? The realization hit me like a sledgehammer. Wilson wasn't just my best friend and business partner. He was a decorated police detective with 20 years on the force. He had connections, influence, and the power to make evidence disappear. Even if I took this to the FBI or state police, it would be my word against a respected cop with an impeccable record. Here's what's going to happen, Cody, Wilson continued, his voice turning cold. You're going to accept that your son has some rare illness. You're going to grieve properly. And if you try to cause problems for me or Brittany, well, grief-stricken fathers sometimes do terrible things. Suicide, maybe, or a tragic accident. The stress of losing a child can make a man do unpredictable things. He hung up. I sat in that parking lot for an hour, rage building inside me like molten lava. The system I trusted, the law I believed in, the people I'd loved, they'd all betrayed me. My son was dying because of their greed and lust, and they thought they could just walk away from it. They were wrong. I spent the next day researching everything I could about Wilson Morrison and trying to piece together the full scope of their plan. What I discovered made me realize this conspiracy went deeper than simple murder for insurance money. Wilson had been systematically using his position as a detective to eliminate people who threatened his side businesses. Over the past 5 years, there have been 17 accidental deaths and suicides in our city involving people who'd been investigating financial irregularities or asking too many questions about certain police cases. Wilson wasn't just corrupt, he was a serial killer with a badge. My death was supposed to look like a heart attack brought on by stress. The slow poisoning would mimic the symptoms of cardiovascular disease, especially since I'd been working long hours at the construction company Wilson and I had built together. After my death, Brittany would inherit my half of the business and my life insurance. Nearly $3 million total. But there was more. Brittany had been feeding Wilson information about our clients, particularly those involved in government contracts. Wilson had been using police resources to investigate these clients, gathering blackmail material and inside information that he then sold to competing firms. I was just collateral damage in a much larger operation. The more I learned, the angrier I became. But anger wasn't enough. Danny was still dying, and even if I could somehow expose Wilson and Brittany, the damage was done. The poison had destroyed my son's liver, and the doctors said his chances were slim even with a transplant. I needed more than justice. I needed revenge. That evening, I returned to the hospital to sit with Danny. He was unconscious now, the machines doing most of the work of keeping him alive. Brittany was there, playing the role of grieving mother perfectly. She even managed to produce tears on command. "Oh, Cody," she said, rushing to embrace me. "The doctors said we should start thinking about end-of-life decisions." I held her close, smelling the perfume that Wilson had bought her. I'd seen the receipt in his wallet when he'd paid for dinner last month. "I'm not giving up on him yet. But honey, we have to be realistic. Danny's suffering. Maybe it would be more merciful to what? Kill him." I pulled back to look at her face. She was still beautiful. Blonde hair, blue eyes, the kind of woman who could make men do stupid things. I've been one of those stupid men once. "Is that what you want, Brittany? For Danny to die?" Something flickered in her eyes. Fear? Guilt? Of course not. I just meant that sometimes the kindest thing is to let go. Like you let go of our marriage. She stepped back, her expression changing to one of confusion mixed with alarm. "What are you talking about?" "Nothing," I said, sitting down beside Danny's bed. "I'm just tired. Why don't you go home and rest? I'll stay with him tonight." "Are you sure?" "I'm sure. Give Wilson my regards when you see him." The color drained from her face, but she recovered quickly. "Wilson? Why would I see Wilson?" "I don't know. You two seem close lately." "Very close." She kissed my forehead, the kiss of Judas. "You're stressed, honey. Try to get some sleep." After she left, I sat with Danny through the night, holding his small hand and making him a promise. "I'm going to make them pay, son. I'm going to make them all pay for what they did to you." To understand how to destroy Wilson Morrison and Brittany, I needed to understand who they really were. I'd known Wilson for 15 years, but apparently, I'd never known him at all. I started with the public records. Wilson had joined the police force straight out of college, quickly rising through the ranks with a combination of natural talent and ruthless ambition. He'd been married twice. Both wives had died in accidents. The first had fallen down the stairs and broken her neck. The second had overdosed on prescription medication. Interesting pattern. Digging deeper into old newspaper archives, I found articles about both deaths. In each case, Wilson had been the grieving widower, collecting substantial life insurance payouts. In each case, he'd remarried within a year. Women who were wealthy, beautiful, and tragically short-lived. Brittany was supposed to be wife number 3, once I was out of the picture. But Wilson's history of murdering wives wasn't his only secret. Using my connections in the construction industry, I started investigating the buildings and properties connected to Wilson's side business. What I found was a network of safe houses, money laundering operations, and drug distribution centers that stretched across 3 states. Wilson Morrison wasn't just a corrupt cop killing inconvenient people. He was the head of a criminal organization that used police resources to eliminate competition and protect their operations. My wife had fallen in love with a monster. Learning about Brittany's background was equally revealing. She hadn't grown up poor like she'd always claimed. Her family, the Alexanders, were old money from Connecticut, wealth built on shipping and imports during the early 20th century. But that wealth had come with a dark legacy. Brittany's great-grandfather had been a bootlegger during Prohibition. Her grandfather had been involved with organized crime, and her father had died in federal prison on racketeering charges when she was 16. She'd been raised by her mother, who'd taught her that marriage was a business transaction and love was a weakness to be exploited. Brittany hadn't married me for love. She'd married me because I was successful, trustworthy, and, most importantly, gullible enough to give her access to my money and business connections. Meeting Wilson had been the final piece of her plan. He had the skills and resources to eliminate me, while she provided the inside access and motive. Together, they'd been planning the perfect crime. Except they hadn't counted on Danny. As I sat in the hospital that fourth night, watching my son fight for his life, I realized that Wilson and Brittany had made one crucial mistake. They'd underestimated the love between a father and son. Danny's sacrifice had not only saved my life, it had given me the evidence and motivation I needed to destroy them both. But I wasn't going to rely on the legal system. Wilson controlled too much of the local law enforcement, and Brittany's family still had connections that could make evidence disappear or witnesses change their minds. I was going to handle this myself, and I was going to make sure they suffered before they died. Planning the perfect revenge required patience, resources, and a complete willingness to cross lines I'd never imagined crossing. Fortunately, 15 years in the construction business had taught me about explosives, heavy machinery, and how to make problems disappear permanently. More importantly, it had taught me about the kind of men who could help with problems that required extreme solutions. Rafael Andrade had worked for me for 3 years before I learned about his past. He'd been a combat engineer in the Army, specializing in demolitions and urban pacification, a polite term for making buildings and the people inside them cease to exist. After his discharge, he'd worked as a freelance problem solver for people who needed things done quietly and efficiently. I found Rafael at his apartment on the east side of town, a sparse place that looked more like a military barracks than a home. When I explained what I needed, he listened without expression, occasionally nodding or asking technical questions. "This Wilson," Rafael said when I finished, "he's expecting you to come at him directly. Grieving father, righteous anger, probably thinks you'll try to shoot him or run him down with a truck. Probably. So we don't do that. We make him come to us on our terms, in a place where his badge and his connections don't matter." Rafael's plan was elegantly simple. Wilson's criminal organization depended on a network of safe houses and distribution points. If those locations were compromised or destroyed, Wilson would be forced to consolidate his operations into a single, defensible position, an abandoned warehouse complex on the outskirts of town that he'd been using as his primary base. More importantly, if his business partners thought Wilson was losing control, they'd demand a face-to-face meeting to discuss restructuring their arrangement. Criminal organizations didn't tolerate weakness or failure. "We hit his operations systematically," Rafael explained, showing me blueprints of the warehouse complex. "Make it look like a rival gang moving in on his territory. He'll have to respond, and when he does, we'll be waiting." "What about Brittany?" Rafael smiled, a cold expression that made me understand why enemies of the United States had learned to fear men like him. "She'll come to him. Women like that always run to the strongest predator when they're scared. She'll think Wilson can protect her. And Danny, your son's a fighter. Keep him alive long enough for us to finish this, and maybe the satisfaction of knowing his sacrifice meant something will help him pull through." Over the next week, we put our plan into motion. Rafael had contacts in the criminal underworld, men who were happy to cause problems for corrupt cops in exchange for cash and the promise of reduced competition. The first target was a meth lab Wilson operated in an abandoned gas station. The explosion was visible from miles away and made the evening news as a gas leak accident. The second was a money laundering operation disguised as a used car lot. That fire burned for 6 hours and destroyed over $1 million in illegal proceeds. By the third operation, a drug distribution center in a converted restaurant, Wilson knew he was under attack. The beauty of Raphael's plan was that all the evidence pointed to a gang war between rival criminal organizations. Wilson couldn't call for police backup without exposing his own illegal activities. He was on his own, exactly where we wanted him. Wilson Morrison was many things: murderer, criminal, corrupt cop. But he wasn't stupid. After losing 3 major operations in 5 days, he knew someone was systematically dismantling his empire. What he didn't know was who or why. I'd been careful to maintain my routine during this period. I visited Danny at the hospital every day, played the grieving father perfectly, and even had dinner with Brittany twice. Meals where I pretended to eat food that she'd probably poisoned while secretly disposing of it when she wasn't looking. "You seem better," she said on Friday night, as we sat in our dining room pretending to be a normal married couple. More optimistic about Danny. "The doctors say there might be some improvement in his liver function. Small changes, but positive ones." That was true, since I'd stopped consuming the poison meant for me, and Danny was no longer intercepting it. The toxins in his system were gradually being processed out. He was still critical, but no longer deteriorating. Brittany's smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "That's wonderful news. Maybe we should celebrate." She reached for a bottle of wine, expensive stuff that I was sure had been doctored with something lethal. "I think I'll stick to water tonight. My stomach's been upset." "Are you sure? This is a special bottle. Wilson brought it over yesterday." Of course he had. Wilson was here yesterday, just for a few minutes. He wanted to check on how we were handling everything with Danny. He's such a good friend. "Yes, he is." "What did you two talk?" "In the kitchen, mostly." "Why?" "No reason. I'm just glad he's looking out for us." That night, after Brittany went to bed, I searched the kitchen and found 3 new vials of poison hidden behind the flour canister, enough to kill a dozen men. Wilson was getting desperate and increasing the dosage. It was time to spring the trap. I called Wilson's cell phone at 2 a.m., knowing he'd be awake and paranoid after losing another operation that evening. "Cody? What's wrong?" "Is it Danny?" "Wilson, I need your help. Someone broke into the house tonight while Brittany and I were at the hospital. They didn't take anything, but they left a message." "What kind of message?" "It's written on the wall in the kitchen. It says, 'We know about the warehouse. You have 48 hours. "Wilson, what warehouse? What does this mean?" The silence on the other end lasted nearly 30 seconds. "I'll be right over." "Should I call the regular police?" "No." His response was too quick, too sharp. "No, this sounds like it might be related to some cases I'm working on. Don't call anyone else until I get there." "Okay, but Wilson, I'm scared. If someone's targeting us because of your police work." "They're not targeting you, Cody. This is about me. Pack a bag for you and Brittany. I'm going to take you somewhere safe until this blows over." "What about Danny?" "I can't leave Danny. The hospital is the safest place for him right now. These people won't hurt a sick child." He was right about that. They wouldn't hurt Danny because they were Danny's father and his father's friends. But Wilson didn't know that I knew. "Okay," I said. "How long should we pack for?" "A few days, maybe a week." "And Cody? Don't tell anyone where you're going. Not your family, not your employees, not anyone. These are dangerous people." After he hung up, I called Raphael. He took the bait. He's coming to collect us now, probably taking us to the warehouse. "Perfect. We'll be ready." I went upstairs and woke Brittany, telling her about the break-in and Wilson's plan to take us somewhere safe. She played her part perfectly. Concerned wife, grateful for Wilson's protection, frightened by the mysterious threat. If I hadn't known the truth, I might have actually felt sorry for her. Wilson arrived within 20 minutes, armed and wearing tactical gear under his jacket. He surveyed the fake message Raphael and I had painted on the kitchen wall, nodding grimly. "This is worse than I thought," he said. "These people are professionals. We need to get you out of here now." "Who are they?" Brittany asked, clinging to his arm. "What warehouse are they talking about?" "It's complicated. Let's just say I've made some enemies in my line of work. The important thing is keeping you two safe." We drove through the night to Wilson's warehouse complex, exactly as Raphael had predicted. The building was a fortress surrounded by high fences and equipped with security cameras and motion sensors. Wilson had prepared this place to withstand a siege. Too bad he'd invited the enemy inside. The warehouse complex was larger than I'd expected, 3 connected buildings spread across 5 acres of industrial wasteland. Wilson had turned it into his personal kingdom, complete with living quarters, offices, and storage areas for his various criminal enterprises. "You'll be safe here," he assured us as we entered through a reinforced steel door. "This place is off the grid. No one can find you here." Brittany looked around with obvious familiarity. This wasn't her first visit to Wilson's stronghold. She moved through the corridors like she knew exactly where everything was located. "How long do we have to stay here?" I asked, playing the role of concerned husband. "Until I can neutralize the threat," Wilson replied. "A few days, maybe longer. I've got enough supplies to last a month if necessary." He showed us to a living area that had been set up like a luxury apartment: kitchen, bedrooms, entertainment center. It would have been comfortable if it weren't a prison. "I need to make some calls," Wilson said. "There are people I have to contact about this situation. Make yourselves at home." As soon as he left, Brittany dropped her act. "This is perfect," she said, settling onto the couch with obvious relief. "Once Wilson eliminates whoever's been causing problems, we can move forward with our plans." "What plans?" She looked at me with genuine surprise. "Our plans, honey, for after Danny." She couldn't quite bring herself to say it. "After things settled down, Wilson and I thought we might go away for a while. Maybe Europe. You should come with us." "That sounds nice," I said, sitting beside her. "The 3 of us together." "Exactly. Like a family." I reached over and stroked her hair, soft, blonde, and paid for with money I'd earned while she was planning my murder. "Brittany, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Do you love me?" The question caught her off guard. For a moment, her mask slipped, and I saw something cold and calculating in her eyes. Then she smiled and leaned against me. "Of course I love you, Cody. You're my husband. But do you love Wilson too?" This time she didn't recover as quickly. Wilson is helping us through a difficult time. By sleeping with you?" She went rigid against me. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about you and Wilson planning to kill me so you could be together. I'm talking about Danny intercepting the poison you meant for me and slowly dying because of it. I'm talking about 3 months of watching my son sacrifice his life to save mine." Brittany tried to pull away, but I held her tightly, not enough to hurt her, but enough to keep her from running. "I don't know what you think you. I know everything, Brittany. I have photographs, journals, evidence of everything you and Wilson have been doing. The only reason I'm here is to make sure you both pay for what you did to Danny." She stopped struggling and looked at me with a mixture of fear and confusion. "If you know, then why did you come here? Why didn't you go to the police?" "Because Wilson is the police. Because the system failed me and my son. Because sometimes a man has to handle things himself." That's when Wilson walked back into the room, and I realized he'd been listening from the doorway. Well, he said, drawing his service weapon. "Cody Gross, the grieving father who's too smart for his own good." Wilson kept his gun trained on me while Brittany scrambled to the other side of the room. The mask of friendship was completely gone now, replaced by the cold expression of a predator who'd been cornered. "How long have you known?" he asked. "Danny figured it out first. He's been protecting me for months, eating and drinking the poison you 2 meant for me." Brittany made a sound like a wounded animal. "The poison was never supposed to hurt Danny. It was just meant for her." "Shut up," Wilson snapped. "It doesn't matter now. The kid's going to die anyway, and so is Cody." "What about our plans?" Brittany asked. "What about Europe?" Wilson laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the warehouse walls. "Plans? You think I was actually going to run away with you? You were useful, Brittany, but you were never the end game. After Cody died, I would have given you a few months to grieve. Then you'd have had an unfortunate accident, just like my first 2 wives." The realization hit Brittany like a slap. "You killed him too." "Of course I killed him. Just like I've killed 17 other people who got in my way. Just like I'm going to kill both of you." That's when the lights went out. The warehouse was plunged into absolute darkness, and Wilson's carefully controlled environment became a battlefield where his advantages meant nothing. I heard him curse and move toward where he thought I'd been sitting, but Raphael and I had planned for this moment. While Wilson and Brittany had been talking, I'd been slowly moving toward a hidden panel where Raphael had concealed night vision equipment and weapons. As soon as the power cut, triggered by Raphael from outside. I rolled behind cover and activated the night vision goggles. Wilson was stumbling around in the dark, trying to use his police training to clear the room systematically. Brittany was pressed against the far wall, crying and calling his name. "Wilson," she sobbed. "What's happening?" "Someone cut the power," he replied, his voice professionally calm despite the circumstances. "Stay where you are. Don't move." I could see him clearly through the night vision, a green-tinted figure moving cautiously through the darkness, sweeping his weapon back and forth. He was good, but he was also predictable. Police training emphasized control and procedure, but this wasn't a normal law enforcement situation. This was personal. I picked up a wrench from Raphael's toolkit and threw it across the room. Wilson spun toward the sound, firing twice. The muzzle flashes destroyed his night vision temporarily, and I used that moment to move closer. "You know what your problem is, Wilson?" I called out from the darkness. "You always underestimated the people you were trying to kill. Show yourself, Cody. Let's end this like men. Like you ended it with your wives? Like you were going to end it with me? No thanks." I threw another tool in a different direction. Wilson fired again, but his shots were wild now. He was losing control, letting fear override his training. "Your son is going to die," he said. "Try to regain psychological control. Even if you kill me, Danny is still going to die. The damage is done. Maybe, but at least he'll know his father made you pay for what you did." I circled around behind him while he was focused on the wrong area. Wilson Morrison, decorated police detective, serial killer, destroyer of families, never saw me coming. When I hit him with the tire iron, he went down hard. Wilson wasn't dead, but he wasn't getting up anytime soon. I zip-tied his hands and feet while he was unconscious, then turned my attention to Brittany. She was still cowering against the wall, no longer the confident woman who'd been planning my death. In the green glow of the night vision, she looked small and pathetic. "Please don't kill me," she whispered. "I'll disappear. I'll never bother you again. I'll confess to everything. Will you bring Danny back to health? Will you give him back the months he spent slowly dying to protect me?" I didn't know he was taking the poison. I swear I didn't know. "But you knew you were putting poison in my food. You knew you were trying to murder your husband, the father of your child." Raphael's voice came through the small radio I'd been carrying. "Cody, we've got company. Wilson's partners are here. 3 cars, maybe 8 men. They're surrounding the building. Perfect timing. Wilson's criminal associates had come for their meeting, probably expecting to find their leader in control of the situation. Instead, they were walking into a trap. I dragged Wilson to a chair and slapped him awake. His eyes were unfocused, but he was conscious enough to understand what was happening. "Your friends are here," I told him. "The ones you've been stealing from, lying to, putting at risk with your sloppy operation. What do you think they'll do when they find out you've been compromised?" Wilson's face went pale. Criminal organizations had simple solutions for members who became liabilities. "You can't do this. I'm a police officer. You're a murderer who hides behind a badge. Your own partners are going to execute you, and I'm going to watch." The sound of gunfire erupted outside as Raphael and his associates engaged Wilson's crew. It was a brief, violent exchange that ended with silence. Raphael had chosen his allies well, former military contractors who specialized in this kind of work. When the shooting stopped, Raphael's voice came through the radio again. "All clear. Wilson's people won't be bothering anyone anymore." I looked at Brittany, who was staring at me with absolute terror. "You want to live?" She nodded frantically. "Then you're going to help me save Danny. Wilson has connections with doctors who don't ask questions about how their patient got sick. You're going to use those connections to get Danny the treatment he needs, and you're going to pay for it with every penny of the money you stole from me." "What about Wilson?" I glanced at my former best friend, who was slumped in the chair with blood running down his face. "Wilson is going to disappear. Corrupt cops who get exposed have a habit of running away to countries without extradition treaties. At least, that's what the official report will say." Raphael entered the warehouse with 2 of his associates. They moved with military precision, securing the area and checking for additional threats. "What's the plan for him?" Raphael asked, nodding toward Wilson. "Make it look like he fled the country. Clean out his bank accounts, create a paper trail showing he bought a plane ticket to somewhere without extradition. Leave his car at the airport. And the reality? I looked at Wilson, who was trying to focus on our conversation through his concussion. The reality is that he's going to spend the rest of his life in a very uncomfortable place, thinking about what he did to my son. Raphael nodded. He understood the kind of justice that couldn't be found in courtrooms. 3 months later, Danny came home from the hospital on a Tuesday morning in spring. The experimental treatment had worked. His liver function was returning to normal, and the doctors said he'd make a full recovery. Brittany had kept her end of the bargain. She'd used Wilson's medical connections to get Danny the best possible care, paying for everything with money from Wilson's hidden accounts. After that, she disappeared, probably somewhere in South America where her family's old connections could keep her safe. I didn't care where she went as long as she stayed gone. The official story was that Detective Wilson Morrison had been discovered to be involved with criminal organizations and had fled the country when an investigation got too close. His abandoned car was found at the airport, and airline records showed he'd bought a ticket to Brazil. No one looked too hard for him after that. Corrupt cops who ran away weren't worth the resources it would take to bring them back. Danny never asked what happened to his mother or Uncle Wilson. He was smart enough to understand that some questions were better left unasked. Instead, he focused on getting better, on going back to school, on being a normal 8-year-old boy. Sometimes, late at night, he'd ask me about the journal he'd kept. "Dad, do you think I did the right thing? Protecting you like that? You saved my life, son. You saved both our lives. But I got really sick." "Yes, you did. But you also show me how strong you are, how much you love me. And that gave me the strength to protect both of us." He'd nod and go back to sleep, satisfied with that answer. I never told him the details of what happened to Wilson and Brittany. He didn't need to carry that weight. It was enough that justice had been served, even if that justice came from outside the system that had failed us. Some people might say I went too far, that I should have found another way. But those people never had to watch their child dying, because the people they trusted most had betrayed them. They never had to choose between letting murderers go free or taking justice into their own hands. I made my choice, and I'd make it again. Danny was alive. The people who tried to destroy our family were gone, and we had a future together. Sometimes that's the only justice that matters, the kind a father creates for his son, no matter what the cost. As I tucked Danny into bed that night, he looked up at me with those bright blue eyes that had seen too much but still held hope for tomorrow. "I love you, Dad. I love you too, son. Forever and always." And for the first time in months, we both slept peacefully, knowing we were finally safe. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there. Welcome back to another episode of Infidelity Tales Lab. We're thankful for your continued viewership. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? We love knowing our global reach. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Discovery. Vincent Torres sat rigid in the sterile hospital chair, his weathered hands clasped so tightly his knuckles had turned white. At 45, he carried himself like a man who'd seen too much of the world's darkness, which he had during his 15 years as a Navy SEAL before transitioning to private security consulting. His steel gray eyes never left his 17-year-old son, Kyle, who lay unconscious in the hospital bed, machines beeping steadily around him. The accident had happened 3 hours ago. Kyle's motorcycle had collided with a delivery truck at an intersection. Witnesses said he'd run a red light at full speed, as if he hadn't even seen it. Vincent knew his son was reckless, but he was also an experienced rider who'd never shown such poor judgment before. Diane, his wife of 20 years, sat beside him, occasionally dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. At 42, she still maintained the striking beauty that had first caught his attention when they'd met at a military charity gala. Her auburn hair was perfectly styled, even in crisis, her designer clothes immaculate. Vincent had always admired her composure, but lately, something felt different about her, distant, secretive. "The doctors say he'll be okay," Diane whispered, reaching for Vincent's hand. Her touch felt cold, mechanical. Thank God. Vincent nodded, studying his wife's face. In his line of work, reading people was survival. Diane was nervous, but not in the way a mother should be nervous about her injured child. There was something else, relief, fear of discovery. Kyle stirred, his eyes fluttering open. Dad, he mumbled, his voice weak from the sedatives. I'm here, son. Vincent leaned forward, his voice softening. One of the few people who could bring out that gentleness in him. Kyle's unfocused eyes darted between his parents, then landed on his father. Can you look at my phone? The words came out slurred but urgent. Please, important. Vincent exchanged a glance with Diane, who had suddenly gone rigid. Where is it? Backpack. Kyle's eyes closed again, exhaustion taking over. Vincent found the cracked phone in Kyle's backpack. As he powered it on, Diane's hand shot out to stop him. Maybe we should let him rest first. He asked me to check it. Vincent's tone carried the kind of authority that had commanded elite soldiers. Diane's hand withdrew. The phone's screen illuminated, and Vincent's blood turned to ice. The most recent text conversation was between Kyle and someone named Coach B, but Vincent recognized the number. It was Brett Hutchinson, a 38-year-old personal trainer who worked at Diane's gym. Vincent had met him twice at social functions. The messages painted a sickening picture. Coach B, did you deliver the package like we discussed? Kyle, yeah, but I don't feel good about this, Coach B. Your mom says you're mature enough to handle adult responsibilities, Kyle. What if my dad finds out? Coach B, he won't. This stays between us. Your mom is counting on you, Kyle. The money they gave me. It feels wrong, Coach B. You're helping your mom be happy. Sometimes that requires difficult choices. Vincent scrolled further back, his rage building with each message. For months, Diane and Brett had been manipulating Kyle, using him to deliver packages, carry messages, even spy on Vincent's business meetings. They'd convinced the teenager he was protecting his mother's happiness and paid him to keep secrets from his father. But the final message thread made Vincent's vision blur with fury. Coach B, tonight's the big one. Your dad's overseas contract gets signed tomorrow, Kyle. Mom said after this, we might have to move away, Coach B. That's right. Just you, me, and your mom. New life, new family, Kyle. What about Dad? Coach B, sometimes people serve their purpose, and it's time to move on. Vincent's hands began to shake, not with fear, but with the kind of controlled rage that had made him legendary in the field. They weren't just having an affair. They were planning to take Kyle and disappear with Vincent's money, using his own son as their accomplice. Vincent, Dr. Martinez approached, his expression grave. We need to discuss Kyle's blood work. Vincent immediately called the attending physician over, showing him the phone. As the doctor read, his face darkened. This explains the unusual toxicology results. Your son had traces of anxiety medication in his system, not prescribed to him. This could have affected his judgment, caused disorientation. Vincent turned to Diane, his voice deadly calm. Care to explain why our son had medication in his system? Diane's face had gone ashen. I don't know what you're talking about. The doctor continued. We're required to report this to the police. This appears to be a case of drug administration to a minor, possibly contributing to the accident. As Dr. Martinez stepped away to make the call, Vincent looked at his wife, really looked at her. The woman he'd loved, protected, and built a life with had been systematically poisoning their son's mind and body. She turned Kyle into a weapon against his own father. This is unbelievable, Vincent said quietly, his voice carrying the promise of retribution. Diane turned pale, finally understanding that her carefully constructed deception was crumbling. But she had no idea what she'd awakened. Vincent Torres was not a man who forgave or forgot, and he'd spent decades learning exactly how to destroy enemies who threatened his family. The war had begun. Chapter 2. The Hunter's Past. Vincent stepped into the hospital corridor, his mind shifting into the tactical mode that had kept him alive through 7 combat deployments. He needed information, and he needed it fast. First, he called his business partner, Tommy Rodriguez, a former Marine intelligence officer who now helped run their security consulting firm. Tommy, I need a full surveillance package on Diane and Brett Hutchinson. Everything, financials, communications, movements, associations. And I need it by tomorrow. Rough day. Tommy's voice carried concern. He'd never heard Vincent this cold. My wife's been running a long-term psychological operation against me using my own son. She nearly got him killed today. A pause. Jesus. You want me to bring in the full team? Not yet. Silent operation only. And Tommy? Start checking our business accounts. If she's planning to run, she'll need access to capital. After hanging up, Vincent walked to Kyle's room, where his son was now more alert. Diane had stepped out, probably to text her lover, Vincent thought grimly. Kyle. Vincent sat down, his voice gentle but serious. I read your messages. I know what they've been asking you to do. Kyle's eyes filled with tears. Dad, I'm so sorry. Mom said, she said you've been working too much, that she was lonely. She said Brett made her happy, and if I helped them, we could all be happier. What kind of packages were you delivering? Documents, photos, sometimes just notes. Brett said they were business stuff for Mom's new job opportunity. Kyle winced as he shifted. But today was different. They gave me these pills, said they'd help me stay calm during the delivery. I felt weird riding home, like everything was moving too slow. Vincent's jaw tightened. They'd drugged his son to make him compliant, nearly killing him in the process. Kyle, everything they told you was a lie. Your mother and Brett have been planning to steal from our family and disappear. But Mom said, your mother and I are getting divorced. Vincent's voice was matter of fact. What I need to know is, are you with me or with him? Kyle didn't hesitate. With you, Dad. Always. Vincent nodded, a cold smile playing at his lips. He'd raised Kyle to value loyalty and truth, qualities that would serve them both well in what was coming. Later that evening, Vincent sat in his home office, a converted bunker he'd built in the basement, surrounded by the tools of his trade. Multiple monitors displayed surveillance feeds, encrypted communication channels, and financial tracking systems. This room had coordinated operations across 3 continents. Tonight, it would coordinate the destruction of 2 people who'd betrayed his family. Tommy arrived with a thick folder. You're not going to like this. Vincent opened the file to find a year's worth of evidence. Diane and Brett had been planning this for 11 months. They've been slowly transferring small amounts from joint accounts into overseas holdings. More disturbing, they've been documenting Vincent's business dealings, client information, and even personal habits. Brett had military training too. He'd been discharged from the Army for inappropriate conduct with subordinates' families. They're not just stealing money, Tommy observed. They're building a complete intelligence package on you. This looks like preparation for blackmail, or worse. Vincent's mind raced through possibilities. His consulting work involved protecting high-profile clients, politicians, executives, foreign nationals. That information in the wrong hands could destroy lives, end careers, even start wars. The final document in the folder made Vincent's blood boil. It was a psychological evaluation Brett had commissioned on Kyle, describing him as malleable and ideal for long-term manipulation. They hadn't just used Kyle, they'd studied him like a lab rat. Vincent opened his secure communications system and began making calls. First to Marcus Chun, a former CIA operative who specialized in making people disappear, not physically, but financially and digitally. Then to Isabella Santos, a forensic psychologist who understood how to dismantle someone's mental defenses. Finally, to David Kim, a lawyer whose specialty was creative interpretations of justice. Gentleman, lady, Vincent said when they were all on the secure conference call. I have a problem that requires the kind of solution we use to provide for national security. As Vincent outlined the situation, he watched his team's expressions grow darker. These weren't just business associates. They were the closest thing to family he had outside Kyle. They'd all lost people to betrayal before, and they understood the stakes. What's the objective? Marcus asked. Total destruction. Financial, social, psychological. I want them to understand what happens when you betray a Torres. And I want everyone else to see it too. Timeline, Isabella inquired. 2 weeks. Diane thinks she's got me fooled. and Brett thinks he's untouchable. I'm going to let them think they're winning right up until the moment I destroy them completely. Vincent looked at Kyle's medical chart, thinking about his son lying in that hospital bed because of their greed and manipulation. Some might call what he was planning excessive. Vincent called it proportional response. The hunters had become the hunted, and they had no idea what was coming for them. Chapter 3. The Web Titans. Over the next 3 days, Vincent played the role of the concerned husband and father perfectly. He brought Diane flowers, held her hand during Kyle's medical consultations, and even suggested they take a weekend trip once Kyle was released. All the while, his team was systematically dismantling the lives of his wife and her lover. "You're being so wonderful," Diane said as they sat in Kyle's room on Thursday morning. "I know this has been hard on you too." "We're family," Vincent replied, squeezing her hand while noting how she flinched at the word family. "We get through things together." What Diane didn't know was that every conversation was being recorded. Marcus had installed microsurveillance throughout their house, Diane's car, and even Brett's apartment. Vincent now knew that they planned to execute their final theft on Sunday, the day Kyle was scheduled to be released from the hospital. Kyle had become Vincent's secret weapon. The teenager, disgusted by how he'd been manipulated, was now feeding false information back to his mother and Brett. When Diane asked about Vincent's mood, Kyle reported that his father seemed really stressed about work and not paying attention to anything else. When Brett texted Kyle about Vincent's overseas contract, Kyle confirmed it was definitely happening Monday instead of the actual signing date of Friday. The psychological profile Isabella had created on Diane and Brett was fascinating. Diane, despite her outward confidence, was deeply insecure and addicted to validation. She convinced herself that Vincent's work took precedence over their marriage, justifying her affair and theft as taking what she deserved. Brett, meanwhile, was a textbook narcissist who enjoyed manipulating younger, vulnerable people. He'd been doing this for years. Kyle wasn't his first victim. "They're both fundamentally weak," Isabella reported during their Wednesday night briefing. "Diane needs constant reassurance, and Brett needs to feel powerful. When that support system disappears, they'll turn on each other." David Kim had been busy with legal preparations. "I've documented everything for the divorce proceedings. With the evidence of child endangerment, drug administration, and financial fraud, she'll be lucky to get supervised visitation with Kyle." Brett's looking at serious criminal charges. But Vincent wanted more than legal victories. He wanted them to feel the same helplessness and betrayal they'd inflicted on Kyle. Friday morning brought the first phase of Vincent's counterattack. Brett arrived at the gym to find his employment terminated and his personal training certifications suspended pending investigation. The investigation, triggered by an anonymous tip about inappropriate relationships with clients' families, would find a financial records Marcus had carefully planted, showing Brett had been embezzling membership fees. Diane came home that afternoon furious. "Brett got fired. They're saying he was stealing money, but that's impossible." "That's terrible," Vincent said, maintaining his concerned husband facade. "Maybe there's been some mistake. It has to be. Brett would never." Diane caught herself before admitting too much familiarity with Brett's character. What Diane didn't know was that the anonymous tip had come with a carefully constructed digital trail suggesting the information came from a rival personal trainer jealous of Brett's success. Brett would never suspect Vincent was behind it. That evening, Vincent received a text from Kyle. "Mom's really upset. She keeps calling Brett, but he's not answering. She asked me if I've noticed you acting suspicious." Vincent smiled. Phase 2 was already beginning. The stress of their plan falling apart would make them desperate, and desperate people made mistakes. Saturday brought more pressure. Diane discovered that several of their joint accounts had been frozen due to suspicious activity. Another Marcus special, using legitimate banking security protocols to create seemingly random obstacles. When Diane called the bank, she was told it was routine and would be resolved in 3 to 5 business days. "This is unbelievable," she told Vincent. "Everything's going wrong at once." "Don't worry," Vincent replied, wrapping his arms around her in what looked like comfort but felt like a predator sizing up prey. "These things happen. We'll figure it out." That night, Kyle reported more intelligence. Mom's really scared now. She keeps mentioning having to change plans. She asked me if I'd ever want to live somewhere else. Maybe with her and a friend. Vincent's anger burned cold and bright. Even after everything, she was still planning to manipulate Kyle into leaving with them. The teenage boy had been through enough trauma. Vincent wouldn't let them put him through an ugly custody battle too. Sunday morning, Vincent made his move. He sent a single text to Brett. Meet me at Riverside Park, 2 p.m. Come alone. We need to talk about Kyle. The message came from a burner phone registered to a fake identity, one of many Vincent maintained for his consulting work. Brett would be curious enough to come, especially if he thought Vincent suspected something but didn't have proof. At the same time, Vincent sent an anonymous package to Diane's office containing printed screenshots of Brett's text conversations with 3 other married women whose husbands were Brett's personal training clients. Marcus had spent days crafting these false conversations using Brett's real phone patterns and the women's actual numbers, creating evidence that Brett had been running multiple simultaneous affairs. The psychological warfare was working perfectly. By Sunday afternoon, Diane thought Brett was a serial manipulator who'd been using her, while Brett thought Vincent might know about the affair, but not the theft. Both were operating from incomplete information, making decisions based on fear rather than facts. As Vincent prepared for his meeting with Brett, he reflected on how far they'd all fallen. 3 days ago, he'd been a loyal husband and father. Now he was orchestrating the systematic destruction of 2 people who'd betrayed his family. But Vincent Torres had learned long ago that some actions couldn't be forgiven or forgotten. His wife and her lover had crossed a line when they endangered Kyle. Everything that happened next was simply the consequence of that choice. The real war was about to begin. Chapter 4. The Trap Springs. Vincent arrived at Riverside Park 30 minutes early, positioning himself with clear sight lines and multiple exit routes. Old habits from military operations. Brett Hutchinson walked into the clearing at exactly 2 p.m., his confident swagger betraying none of the pressure Vincent knew he was under. Vincent, Brett called out, maintaining distance. Thanks for meeting me. I figure we should clear the air about some things. Vincent studied the man who'd been manipulating his son for months. Brett was physically impressive, 6'2", muscular build, the kind of presence that attracted people like Diane who mistook physical dominance for strength. But Vincent saw what his wife had missed. The nervous energy of someone who'd built his life on manipulation rather than genuine capability. You're sleeping with my wife, Vincent said without preamble. You've been using my son as your errand boy, and you've been planning to rob me blind. Brett's composure cracked for just a moment before reforming. I think there's been some misunderstanding. The only misunderstanding, Vincent interrupted, is yours. You thought you were playing against some corporate executive who wouldn't fight back. But you picked the wrong family, Brett. Vincent pulled out his phone and played one of the recorded conversations from Brett's apartment. Him and Diane planning to disappear with Vincent's money after the overseas contract was signed. Brett's face went white as he heard his own voice discussing how to neutralize Vincent's ability to track them. That's impossible, Brett stammered. How did you? I spent 15 years hunting terrorists in places you couldn't find on a map, Vincent replied calmly. Did you really think I wouldn't notice when enemies got into my house? Brett's fight-or-flight response was kicking in. Vincent could see him calculating distances, exits, whether he could overpower the older man. It was almost amusing. Brett had no idea that Vincent had killed trained soldiers with his bare hands. Look, Vincent, maybe we can work something out, Brett said, his voice taking on the manipulative tone he'd used with Kyle. Diane and I, it just happened. These things are complicated. Vincent moved faster than Brett could process, closing the distance and grabbing the younger man's throat with just enough pressure to make breathing difficult. Did you give my son drugs before he got on that motorcycle? It was just anxiety medication, Brett gasped, to keep him calm during... Vincent's grip tightened. My son almost died because you needed him compliant for your theft. That makes you responsible for attempted murder of a minor. You can't prove anything, Brett wheezed. Vincent released him and stepped back, smiling coldly. I don't need to prove anything, Brett. I just need to destroy you. He showed Brett his phone screen, which displayed a live feed from inside Brett's apartment. Marcus had placed cameras everywhere, capturing Brett's illegal activities with multiple clients' families, his drug dealing to maintain control over victims, and his detailed plans to blackmail Vincent with stolen business information. That footage gets uploaded to a public server in exactly 6 hours, Vincent said. Unless you do exactly what I tell you. Brett straightened his shirt, tried to regain some dignity. What do you want? First, you gotta call Diane and tell her the plan has changed. You're leaving town immediately because the police are investigating the gym situation. Second, you're going to transfer every penny you've stolen back to my accounts. Third, you're going to disappear and never contact my family again. And if I don't, Vincent's smile turned predatory. Then I release everything. The affairs, the drugs, the theft, the child endangerment. Your military record gets reopened and investigated. Your family finds out what you've become. And that's just the legal consequences. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. But if you ever come near my son again, Brett, I'll handle this the way I used to handle threats overseas. Do you understand? Brett nodded, his earlier confidence completely shattered. Vincent had broken him psychologically without laying a serious hand on him, the mark of a true professional. As Brett stumbled away, Vincent felt no satisfaction. This was just the beginning. Diane's betrayal cut deeper than Brett's manipulation. She'd endangered their son, violated 20 years of marriage, and tried to steal the life Vincent had built for their family. Her punishment would be more elaborate, more personal, and far more devastating. Vincent drove home to find Diane pacing anxiously in their living room. Brett called, she said immediately. He says he has to leave town, that the police investigation is getting serious. Vincent, I'm scared. Vincent wrapped his arms around her, feeling her body shake with fear and guilt. What aren't you telling me, Diane? She pulled back, searching his face for signs of suspicion. Nothing. Brett's been a good friend, and I'm worried about him. The lie hung in the air between them. Vincent felt a cold rage settle in his chest. Not the hot anger of discovery, but the calculating fury of a predator who'd cornered his prey. I have to make some business calls, he said, kissing her forehead. Kyle's being released tomorrow, so let's plan a nice family dinner. As Vincent walked to his office, Diane called after him. Vincent, do you think we're okay? Our family, I mean. Vincent turned back, his expression perfectly neutral. I think we're exactly where we're supposed to be, Diane. Everything's going according to plan. If she'd been paying attention, she might have noticed the double meaning in his words. But Diane was too consumed by her own guilt and fear to recognize the threat standing 3 feet away from her. Tomorrow, Kyle would come home, and then Vincent would show his wife what happened to people who betrayed the Torres family. Chapter 5. Psychological Warfare. Monday afternoon, Vincent and Diane brought Kyle home from the hospital. Their son moved carefully, his left arm still in a sling from the accident, but his eyes were alert and determined. As they settled him into the living room, Vincent caught Kyle's almost imperceptible nod, their agreed signal that he was ready to play his part in the final phase. I'm so glad you're home, Diane said, fussing over Kyle's pillows. I was so worried about you. Thanks, Mom, Kyle replied, but Vincent noticed the slight distance in his voice. His son was an exceptional actor when motivated. That evening, Vincent initiated what Isabella Santos had termed controlled psychological pressure. He began asking seemingly innocent questions during dinner, each one designed to increase Diane's paranoia. Diane, did you know the bank called about some unusual account activity? Vincent mentioned casually while passing the salad. Apparently, someone's been monitoring our financial patterns. Diane's fork clinked against her plate. What kind of monitoring? They wouldn't say specifically. Something about federal oversight due to my government contracts. Vincent kept his tone conversational. They asked if we'd shared our account information with anyone recently. Of course not, Diane said quickly. Who would we share that with? Vincent shrugged. I can't think of anyone. It's probably just routine. Kyle played his part perfectly, looking confused. Mom, didn't you say you were helping someone with their finances recently? That personal trainer guy. Brett, Diane corrected automatically, then caught herself. No, I never. We just talked about general fitness payment plans. Vincent filed away her slip. Even under pressure, she was trying to protect Brett's identity, right up until the moment she realized he'd abandoned her. After dinner, Vincent excused himself to take a business call that was actually a briefing with his team. Tommy Rodriguez reported that Brett had indeed fled the state, driving toward Mexico with what little money he had left. Marcus had been tracking his movements through compromised credit cards and cell phone signals. He's scared, Tommy observed. Keeps looking over his shoulder, changing routes randomly. He knows he's being watched, but doesn't know by whom. Good, Vincent replied. Let him run. The farther he gets from my family, the better. What about Diane's psychological state? Isabella Santos had been analyzing the surveillance footage of Diane's behavior over the past week. She's approaching a breaking point. Loss of control, abandonment by her co-conspirator, and increasing suspicion from you. She'll either confess or attempt something desperate within the next 48 hours. Vincent preferred confession. It would make the divorce proceedings cleaner and give Kyle closure about his mother's betrayal. But he was prepared for desperation too. Tuesday morning brought Vincent's masterstroke. He announced at breakfast that he'd be working late that evening, giving Diane an opportunity to panic about Brett's disappearance. Then he had Marcus send Diane a series of untraceable text messages designed to look like they came from Brett. Had to run. Police getting close. You're on your own. Don't contact me again. This is over. Find another plan. I'm not going down for your husband's money. Vincent watched from his home office security monitors as Diane received each message. Her face cycled through disbelief, anger, and finally despair. She tried calling Brett 17 times. Each call went straight to voicemail. By evening, Diane was frantic. She cornered Kyle in his room, not knowing Vincent had installed additional surveillance there. Kyle, sweetheart, I need to ask you something important, Diane said, sitting on his bed. If something happened to Dad and me, if we had to go away for a while, would you want to come with me? Kyle looked at his mother with perfectly crafted confusion. What do you mean, Mom? Why would something happen to Dad? Sometimes adults have to make difficult choices, and I want to make sure you'd be okay. I want to stay with Dad, Kyle said simply. He's always been there for me. Vincent watched Diane's face crumble through the monitor. Her son, the boy she'd manipulated and endangered, was choosing his father over her. The psychological impact was devastating. That night, Diane made her desperate play. She attempted to access Vincent's personal safe, not knowing it was equipped with biometric locks and silent alarms. Vincent's security system recorded everything as she tried various combinations, growing increasingly frantic when nothing worked. Finally, she broke down and called the one number she thought might help, Brett's emergency contact, which was actually a forwarding service Marcus had created. When she poured out her fears about Vincent acting suspicious and begged for help escaping with Kyle, she was confessing everything to a recording device that would be used in court. Vincent appeared in the doorway of his study as Diane hung up the phone. Working late? He asked quietly. Diane spun around, guilt written across her face. I couldn't sleep. I was just checking on the house security. Were you? Vincent stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. Or were you trying to access my safe? The color drained from Diane's face. Vincent, I can explain. Can you? His voice carried the same deadly calm he'd used with Brett. Can you explain why you've been stealing from our family? Can you explain why you drugged our son? Can you explain why you were planning to disappear with my money and Kyle? Diane's legs gave out as she collapsed into a chair. How long have you known? Since the hospital. Kyle's phone was very enlightening. Kyle knows. The betrayal in her voice was almost comical. A woman who'd manipulated her son for months was hurt that he'd chosen honesty with his father. Vincent sat across from her, his expression cold and analytical. Kyle knows everything, Diane. How you used him, how you endangered him, how you were planning to steal his inheritance and drag him away from his home. It wasn't supposed to happen like this, Diane whispered. We were just going to take enough to start over. Brett said a lot of things, right up until he ran away and left you to face the consequences alone. Vincent pulled out his phone and played the recording of Diane's conversation with the forwarding service. As she listened to her own voice begging for help to escape with Vincent's money and Kyle, her face went from white to green. 20 years, Diane, Vincent said when the recording ended. 20 years of marriage, and this is what you choose. Not counseling, not honest conversation, theft, manipulation, and child endangerment. I'm sorry, she sobbed. I made terrible mistakes, but we can fix this. We can go to counseling, start over. Vincent's laugh was harsh and bitter. There's no we anymore. There's no starting over. You crossed a line when you involved Kyle, and now you live with the consequences. He stood up, looking down at the woman who'd shared his life for 2 decades. Tomorrow morning, you'll pack a bag and leave this house. David Kim will contact you about divorce proceedings. You'll have supervised visitation with Kyle if he chooses to see you, which, given how you manipulated him, seems unlikely. Vincent, please. The only reason you're not in jail tonight is because I don't want Kyle to go through the trauma of testifying against his mother. But if you fight me on the divorce, if you try to take anything that isn't legally yours, if you even think about contacting Kyle without permission, I will make sure you face criminal charges for every crime you've committed. Vincent walked to the door, then turned back. Brett was wrong about one thing, Diane. This isn't about you serving your purpose and it being time to move on. This is about consequences for betrayal. And I never forget, and I never forgive. As he left his former wife, sobbing in the study, Vincent felt no satisfaction, only the cold completion of a necessary task. Some people called him ruthless. Vincent called it loyalty to the family that remained. Upstairs, Kyle was waiting in his room. Is it over, Dad? It's over, Vincent confirmed. Tomorrow, it'll just be us. Kyle nodded, relief flooding his features. Good. I never want to see her again. Vincent understood that sentiment completely. Some betrayals were too deep for forgiveness, even from family. Especially from family. Chapter 6. No Mercy. Wednesday morning, Vincent woke at 5 a.m. to find Diane's side of the bed empty. He discovered her in the kitchen, fully dressed with a suitcase by the door, staring out the window with hollow eyes. She'd aged a decade in the past week. Her perfect composure finally shattered beyond repair. I was hoping we could talk before Kyle wakes up, she said without turning around. Vincent poured himself coffee, noting how his soon-to-be ex-wife flinched at the sound of the mug hitting the counter. What's left to say? I want to explain. You want to manipulate, Vincent corrected. It's what you've always done, Diane. The difference is now I see it for what it is. She turned to face him, and Vincent was struck by how much he'd once loved this woman. The realization brought no softness, only a bitter acknowledgement of time wasted on someone unworthy of loyalty. I never meant for Kyle to get hurt, Diane said. The medication was just supposed to keep him calm. You drugged my son. Vincent's voice cut through her excuses like a blade. You turned him into your accomplice in stealing from his own family. You made him lie to me for months. And when your plan started falling apart, you nearly got him killed. It was Brett's idea. Vincent slammed his mug down hard enough to crack it. Stop blaming others. The kitchen fell silent, except for the coffee dripping from the fractured mug onto the granite counter. Vincent's fury was controlled but absolute, and for the first time, Diane seemed to truly understand what she'd awakened. You made choices, Vincent continued. Every text to Brett, every lie to Kyle, every dollar you stole, every pill you gave our son. Those were your choices, Diane. Own them. Kyle appeared in the doorway, taking in the scene with remarkable composure for a 17-year-old who'd just learned his mother was a stranger. I heard voices, Kyle said quietly. Is she leaving? Vincent nodded. Say whatever you need to say to your mother. This is the last conversation you'll have in this house. Kyle studied Diane for a long moment, and Vincent saw his son's natural compassion warring with justified anger. Finally, Kyle spoke. I hope someday you understand what you threw away. Kyle, please. Diane stepped toward her son. I love you. Everything I did was because. Everything you did was selfish. Kyle interrupted, his voice steady but cold. Dad would have died for me. You were willing to let me die for money. The truth of those words hit Diane like a physical blow. She stumbled backward, reaching for the counter to steady herself. That's not. I would never. She started, but the words died as she met Kyle's eyes. Her son was looking at her the way Vincent now looked at her, with the kind of disappointment that burned deeper than hate. Vincent's phone buzzed. Tommy Rodriguez. Package delivered to her lawyer's office. Divorce papers, restraining order, and criminal evidence file. She'll get copies when she tries to leave the state. Vincent had anticipated that Diane might try to flee once she realized the scope of his knowledge. The restraining order would keep her within jurisdiction while the divorce proceeded, and the criminal evidence file would ensure her lawyer understood the consequences of fighting the settlement terms. There's a car waiting outside, Vincent told Diane. It'll take you to the hotel room I've arranged. You have 3 days to find permanent housing before the temporary arrangement expires. Vincent, I don't have any money. You should have thought about that before you try to steal mine. His tone carried no sympathy. David Kim will contact you about allowed access to marital assets for basic living expenses. But the house, the businesses, Kyle's college fund, all of that stays where it belongs. Diane picked up her suitcase with shaking hands. At the door, she turned back one final time. I know you'll never forgive me, but someday you might understand that people make mistakes when they're hurting. People make choices, Vincent replied. You chose Brett over Kyle. You chose money over family. You chose manipulation over honesty. Now you get to live with those choices. Kyle walked over and stood next to his father, presenting a united front that made Diane's abandonment complete. The son she'd thought she could manipulate had become the man Vincent had raised him to be, loyal, honest, and strong enough to reject toxicity even when it came from someone he'd once loved. After Diane left, Vincent and Kyle stood in the sudden quiet of their house. The absence felt different than when Diane traveled for work. This was permanent, final, the closing of a chapter that had nearly destroyed their family. Do you think she'll try to come back? Kyle asked. Not if she's smart, Vincent replied. But intelligence was never your mother's strongest quality. Vincent's phone rang. Marcus Chin's voice was crisp and professional. Target acquired at hotel. Surveillance in place. She's made 6 calls to Brett's voicemail and 2 attempts to contact lawyers in other states. Let her try, Vincent said. Every lawyer she calls will receive the evidence file within an hour. Word travels fast in legal circles about clients who commit crimes against children. The next few days passed in a strange calm. Kyle returned to school, where news of his parents' separation was met with the usual teenage gossip and drama. But Vincent had prepared for this too. Isabella Santos had briefed Kyle on how to handle questions about his mother without revealing the full scope of her betrayal. People will ask, she'd told Kyle during one of their sessions. Just say your parents are getting divorced and you're living with your dad. Don't give details about the theft or manipulation. Let the adults handle the legal consequences. Kyle had proved surprisingly adept at managing the social pressure. Vincent suspected his son had inherited more than just his height and build. The boy had a natural ability to compartmentalize trauma and focus on what mattered, traits that would serve him well in life. Friday evening brought the call Vincent had been expecting. David Kim, she's hired a lawyer. Jonathan Pierce from downtown. He's reputation for taking difficult cases, but he's also smart enough to recognize when his client doesn't have leverage. What's Pierce's angle? Custody. He's going to argue that keeping Kyle from his mother is cruel and unusual, especially given the boy's recent trauma. He'll claim you're using the situation to poison Kyle against Diane. Vincent smiled coldly. Let him try. Kyle's old enough to speak for himself in court, and he knows exactly what his mother did to him. Vincent, David's voice carried a warning. Pierce is good at emotional manipulation with juries. He'll paint Diane as a woman who made mistakes but deserves redemption. He'll make you look controlling and vindictive. Then we'll give him something more substantial to worry about. That night, Vincent activated the final phase of his plan. Marcus released carefully edited portions of the surveillance footage to Diane's lawyer, just enough to show her drugging Kyle, planning theft, and manipulating the boy against his father. The full footage remained sealed, but these excerpts would be enough to make Pierce understand that fighting Vincent Torres was a losing proposition. The message was clear. Vincent had evidence of multiple felonies, and he was prepared to use it if Diane didn't accept the divorce terms quietly. By Monday morning, Pierce had called David Kim to discuss settlement options. The war was over. Vincent had won completely, ruthlessly, and without mercy. But as he watched Kyle leave for school that morning, Vincent knew the victory was hollow. He'd saved his son and protected his family's future. But the cost had been 20 years of shared history and the idealistic belief that love could overcome any obstacle. Still, some prices were worth paying. Some betrayals demanded absolute consequences. And Vincent Torres never forgot and never forgave. Chapter 7. The Final Judgment. 2 weeks after Diane's departure, Vincent sat in David Kim's conference room reviewing the final divorce settlement. The terms were exactly what he demanded. Full custody of Kyle, complete control of all family assets, and a restraining order preventing Diane from contacting either of them without court approval. She signed everything, David reported. Pierce convinced her that fighting would only result in criminal charges. She gets minimal spousal support, barely enough for basic living expenses, and supervised visitation with Kyle once per month if he agrees to it. Has Kyle indicated whether he wants to see her? He's been clear. No contact until he's 18 and can make that decision as an adult. David closed the file. Honestly, Vincent, I've never seen such a complete victory in a contested divorce. Most judges would have given her something. Vincent's expression remained neutral. Most wives don't commit felonies against their own children. What David didn't know was that Vincent had provided additional incentive for Diane's cooperation. Marcus had made sure she understood that Brett Hutchinson was now under federal investigation for multiple crimes across 3 states, including identity theft, drug trafficking, and manipulation of minors. If Diane fought the divorce, her connection to Brett's criminal enterprise would be thoroughly examined by federal prosecutors. The choice had been simple: accept Vincent's terms or risk spending the next decade in federal prison. That afternoon, Vincent found Kyle in his room studying, textbooks spread across the desk in the same methodical arrangement Vincent used for mission planning. The boy had adapted to their new normal with remarkable resilience. But Vincent knew the trauma ran deeper than Kyle's composed exterior suggested. "How are you doing with all this?" Vincent asked, settling into the chair beside Kyle's desk. Kyle looked up from his calculus homework. "Relieved, mostly. Is that terrible?" "No, it's honest." Vincent studied his son's face, seeing his own features reflected back. The steady gaze, the controlled composure, the intelligence that missed very little. "You don't owe her forgiveness, Kyle. Not now, maybe not ever. Sometimes I wonder if I should feel bad about choosing you over her," Kyle admitted. "But then I remember how she looked at me in the hospital, like I was just a tool she was worried about losing." Vincent's jaw tightened. Even now, weeks later, the memory of Diane's manipulation made his anger burn cold and bright. "Your mother made her choices," Vincent said. "She chose Brett over our family. She chose money over your safety. She chose manipulation over love. Those choices have consequences." Kyle nodded, then asked the question Vincent had been dreading. "Do you think she ever really loved us?" Vincent considered lying, offering the comfortable fiction that Diane had simply lost her way. But Kyle deserved the truth, even when it hurt. "I think she loved the idea of us," Vincent said carefully. "The status, the security, the image of the perfect family. But real love doesn't endanger the people you claim to care about. Real love doesn't manipulate children or betray trust. What we have is real love." Kyle asked. "What we have is loyalty," Vincent replied. "Trust, respect. Those things matter more than sentiment, Kyle. They're what hold families together when everything else falls apart." That evening, Vincent received an unexpected call from Tommy Rodriguez. "You need to see this," Tommy said, his voice tight with controlled anger. 20 minutes later, Tommy arrived with a tablet displaying social media posts. Diane had created new accounts and was posting carefully crafted messages about her abusive husband who had stolen her son and destroyed her life over a simple misunderstanding. The posts were masterfully manipulative, painting herself as the victim of a controlling spouse who couldn't forgive one mistake. She'd even posted old photos of Kyle in the hospital, suggesting Vincent had somehow caused the accident. She's got sympathetic responses from dozens of people, Tommy reported. Classic victim narrative. Evil husband, innocent wife, poor child caught in the middle. Vincent scrolled through the comments, noting how Diane had carefully omitted any mention of Brett, the theft, or the drugs. To casual observers, she looked like a heartbroken mother fighting for access to her son. Want me to release the real story? Tommy asked. I can have the full evidence package online in an hour. Vincent considered it. The footage of Diane drugging Kyle, the recorded conversations about stealing Vincent's money, the text messages manipulating their son, all of it would destroy her victim narrative completely. But it would also subject Kyle to public scrutiny and judgment. The boy had been through enough without having his mother's crimes become internet entertainment. No, Vincent decided. Kyle doesn't need the world knowing what she did to him. Let her play victim to strangers. The people who matter know the truth. What if she escalates? Starts doing interviews, maybe approaches Kyle at school. Vincent's smile was arctic. Then we remind her why that would be a mistake. The reminder came in the form of a simple message sent to Diane's new phone. A single photo of Brett Hutchinson in federal custody, arrested on charges that would keep him in prison for the next 15 years. The image was accompanied by a brief text. Keep our son's name out of your mouth, or join Brett in federal court. Diane's social media posts stopped immediately. Saturday morning brought an unexpected visitor. Vincent answered the door to find Diane's sister, Rebecca, standing on his porch with an expression of barely controlled fury. You bastard, Rebecca said without preamble. Diane told me what you did to her. Vincent stepped aside, gesturing for her to enter. What exactly did she tell you? That you threw her out over some imaginary affair. That you're keeping Kyle from seeing his mother. That you've stolen everything she's entitled to after 20 years of marriage. Vincent led Rebecca to the living room, where Kyle was reading on the couch. The teenager looked up at his aunt with polite indifference. Another relationship casualty of Diane's betrayal. Kyle, Vincent said calmly, your aunt thinks I'm preventing you from seeing your mother. Would you like to explain the situation? Kyle closed his book and looked directly at Rebecca. Mom drugged me before I got on my motorcycle. She was using me to steal Dad's money with her boyfriend. She nearly got me killed because she needed me compliant for their theft. I choose not to see her because she's dangerous. Rebecca's anger deflated like a punctured balloon. That can't be. Diane would never. Vincent pulled out his phone and played 30 seconds of recorded conversation. Diane and Brett discussing how much money they could steal before disappearing with Kyle. Rebecca's face went white as she heard her sister's voice planning to kidnap her own son. Diane has always been a master manipulator, Vincent said quietly. She's convinced you that she's the victim here. But the truth is, she endangered Kyle for money and betrayed 20 years of marriage for a man who abandoned her the moment things got difficult. Rebecca looked between Vincent and Kyle, seeing the solid bond between father and son that Diane's betrayal had only strengthened. I'm sorry, she whispered. I didn't know. Now you do, Vincent replied. And now you understand why there's no reconciliation coming. Some actions can't be forgiven or forgotten. After Rebecca left, Vincent found Kyle back in his room, staring out the window with a thoughtful expression. You okay? Vincent asked. Yeah, Kyle said. It's just seeing Aunt Rebecca believe Mom's lies reminded me how good Mom was at making people think she was the victim. She almost had me convinced that helping her was the right thing to do. Vincent sat on the edge of Kyle's bed. Manipulation is a powerful weapon, son. Your mother used it for years to get what she wanted. The key is recognizing it so you never fall victim to it again. How do you recognize it? Watch what people do, not what they say. Your mother said she loved us, but she endangered you for money. Brett said he cared about your mom, but he abandoned her when things got difficult. Actions reveal character, Kyle. Always trust actions over words. Kyle nodded, filing away another lesson in reading people and protecting himself from those who would use him. Vincent looked at his son, intelligent, resilient, loyal despite everything he'd been through, and felt a fierce pride. Diane and Brett had tried to break their family, to turn Kyle against his father and steal everything Vincent had built. Instead, they'd only made the Torres family stronger. But the war wasn't quite over yet. Chapter 8, The Hunt continues. 3 months after the divorce was finalized, Vincent received intelligence that changed everything. Marcus Chun called with news that made Vincent's blood run cold. Brett Hutchinson had been released on bail pending trial and had violated the terms of his release by crossing state lines. He's headed back this direction, Marcus reported. Tracked his car through 3 states before he went dark. Last confirmed sighting was 2 hours from your location. Vincent immediately activated the security protocols he'd hoped never to use. Within an hour, armed security was positioned around Kyle's school. Their house was under discreet surveillance, and every electronic device was monitored for potential threats. Why would he come back? Kyle asked when Vincent explained the situation that evening. He has to know you're watching for him. Because he's desperate, Vincent replied, checking the locks on all windows and doors. A ritual that would have seemed paranoid to most people, but was second nature to a man who'd spent decades protecting high-value targets. Federal charges mean serious prison time. He's probably thinking that if he can get leverage over us, he might be able to negotiate a better deal. What Vincent didn't tell Kyle was that Brett's pattern of behavior suggested something more dangerous: revenge. Men like Brett, when cornered, often lashed out at those they blamed for their downfall. And Brett had plenty of reason to blame the Torres family for destroying his plans. The call came at 2 a.m. Vincent's secure phone displayed an unknown number, but the voice that answered was familiar. "Hello, Vincent." Brett's voice carried a new edge, the desperate confidence of a man with nothing left to lose. "We need to talk. We have nothing to discuss." Vincent was already moving through the house, checking on Kyle and activating additional security measures. "I think we do. See, I've been thinking about our conversation at the park, about how you destroyed my life, turned Diane against me, and made sure I'd lose everything. You destroyed your own life when you decided to manipulate children and steal from their families." Brett's laugh was harsh and bitter. "Righteous as always. But here's the thing, Vincent, I know things about your business that your government clients wouldn't appreciate. Illegal surveillance, unauthorized operations, activities that would violate about a dozen federal laws." Vincent's voice remained calm, but his hand moved to the weapon concealed beneath his jacket. "Are you threatening me, Brett? I'm offering you a deal. $5 million, and all the evidence I've gathered disappears. Refuse, and I start making phone calls to very interested parties. You're bluffing. You don't have access to my business files. Don't I?" Brett's voice carried the smugness that Vincent remembered from their first confrontation. "Diane was very helpful in documenting your activities. Photos, financial records, client information. She was quite thorough." Vincent's jaw tightened. Even now, months after her banishment, Diane was still causing damage. The intelligence she'd gathered for Brett represented years of sensitive operations, client identities, and classified methodologies that could destroy Vincent's business and land him in federal prison. "You have 24 hours, Brett continued. "I'll call tomorrow night with instructions for the money transfer. And Vincent, if anything happens to me, if I have an accident or disappear, that information gets released automatically." The line went dead. Vincent immediately called his team. Within minutes, his house was surrounded by enough firepower to stop a small army, and Kyle was relocated to a secure safe house that Vincent maintained for exactly this type of emergency. "He's got Diane's intelligence package," Vincent told Tommy Rodriguez during their emergency briefing. "Photos, documents, maybe even recordings. Everything she collected over the past year." "How much damage could it do?" Isabella Santos asked. "Complete destruction," Vincent replied grimly. "Client identities, operational details, financial structures. Everything needed to dismantle my business and implicate me in activities that don't officially exist." Marcus Chun was already working his keyboard, tracking Brett's movements through digital breadcrumbs and financial transactions. He's staying mobile, using cash, avoiding cameras. Professional-level evasion tactics. He learned from watching us, Vincent realized. Diane documented our methods, and Brett's been studying them for months. David Kim's voice was tense over the secure connection. "Vincent, if he releases that information, we're looking at federal charges for everyone involved. RICO violations, espionage charges, unauthorized foreign operations, This goes way beyond divorce court. Vincent felt the familiar calm that settled over him during crisis situations. Brett had made one crucial mistake. He'd threatened Vincent's family and business simultaneously. That made him an enemy combatant, not a civilian problem. Tommy, I need a clean team. No connections to our official operations. Vincent, Isabella warned, whatever you're thinking. I'm thinking that Brett Hutchinson has violated his bail, crossed state lines with intent to commit extortion, and threatened a minor. Vincent's voice carried the cold authority of his military days. That makes him a fugitive actively endangering my family. The legal system will take months to locate and prosecute him. In the meantime, he's free to release classified information or take direct action against Kyle. Vincent's decision was made. Some threats require immediate resolution. Vincent had spent decades operating in the gray areas between legal and necessary. Protecting his family and preserving national security sometimes required actions that wouldn't be approved in a courtroom. Brett had chosen to play in that arena when he threatened to expose classified operations. Marcus, I need everything you can find on Brett's location, associates, and resources. Tommy, assemble a tracking team. Former military only, people who understand operational security. Isabella, I need a psychological profile on Brett's likely actions and timeline. As his team dispersed to execute their assignments, Vincent allowed himself a moment of bitter satisfaction. Brett thought he was playing chess with a businessman. He was about to discover he'd declared war on a predator. Kyle called from the safe house, his voice steady despite the circumstances. Dad, are you going to be okay? I'm going to handle this, son. Brett made the mistake of threatening our family twice. He won't get a third chance. What about Mom? If Brett has her information. Vincent had been wondering the same thing. Diane's cooperation in gathering intelligence made her either a willing accomplice or a potential victim, depending on Brett's current disposition toward his former lover. Your mother made her choices, Vincent said. Now she gets to live with the consequences, whatever they are. The hunt for Brett Hutchinson had begun, and this time, Vincent Torres wasn't planning to offer mercy or second chances. Some enemies were too dangerous to leave alive. Chapter 9. No Forgiveness. The end came 18 hours later, in a warehouse district 40 miles outside the city. Marcus had tracked Brett through a series of digital breadcrumbs, credit card usage at gas stations, cell phone towers, and ATM transactions that painted a clear picture of his movements. Brett was good at evasion, but Vincent's team was better at hunting. They found Brett and Diane together in a rundown motel, both of them looking like they'd aged years in the past few months. The reunion between the former lovers hadn't been romantic. Surveillance footage showed Brett grabbing Diane roughly and demanding the additional intelligence files she'd hidden from him during their original operation. Vincent watched the confrontation through Marcus's hidden cameras, feeling nothing but cold satisfaction as he witnessed Brett's true nature finally revealed to Diane. The man she'd betrayed her family for was now threatening her with the same violence he'd once promised to protect her from. She looks terrified, Isabella observed, studying Diane's body language on the monitors. Good, Vincent replied without emotion. Now she knows what Kyle felt when they were manipulating him. The operation began at 3 a.m. Vincent's team moved with military precision, surrounding the motel and cutting off all escape routes. Tommy and Marcus handled the technical aspects, disabling security cameras, jamming communications, and ensuring no record of their presence would survive. Vincent himself took point, the role he'd always preferred when absolute certainty was required. Brett was awake when Vincent entered the room, sitting by the window with a laptop and what appeared to be a dead man's switch connected to several online servers. Diane lay on the bed, her wrists zip-tied and duct tape over her mouth. Apparently, Brett had decided she was more liability than asset. Vincent, Brett said without turning around. Right on time. I was just preparing to upload some very interesting files about your business operations. The $5 million wasn't enough? Vincent asked, noting the positions of weapons and potential threats with automatic assessment. This was never about money. Brett finally faced him, and Vincent saw the desperate fury of a man who'd lost everything and wanted to take others down with him. This was about showing you that you're not untouchable, that your perfect control has limits. Vincent stepped further into the room, keeping his hands visible and non-threatening. You could have taken a plea deal, served you time quietly, been forgotten, and let you win. Brett's laugh was bitter and unhinged. You destroyed my life, turned Diane against me, and made sure I'd lose everything I'd worked for. Now I get to return the favor. Diane turned against you because you abandoned her, Vincent pointed out. I just gave her the information to make an informed choice. Brett's finger hovered over the laptop's enter key. Say goodbye to your business, Vincent, and to your freedom. These files will have federal agents knocking down your door within hours. No, they won't. The voice came from behind Brett, Marcus Chun, who'd entered through the bathroom window while Vincent held Brett's attention. The laptop disappeared from Brett's hands so quickly he didn't have time to react. The files were already encrypted and deleted from the servers 6 hours ago, Marcus explained calmly. Your dead man's switch was connected to empty directories. Brett's composure finally shattered completely. That's impossible. I had backups, multiple servers. You had copies of what we wanted you to have, Vincent said. Diane's intelligence gathering was good, but she never had access to our actual operational files. Everything she copied was carefully curated misinformation. The truth hit Brett like a physical blow. For months, he'd been planning revenge using false intelligence that Vincent's team had fed him through Diane's unknowing cooperation. His ultimate weapon was worthless. You played me, Brett whispered. I played you from the moment you threatened my son, Vincent confirmed. Every move you've made, every plan you've developed, every piece of evidence you thought you had, all of it was designed to bring you to exactly this moment. Vincent looked at Diane, still bound on the bed, her eyes wide with terror and understanding. She was finally seeing the complete scope of Vincent's capabilities and realizing that her betrayal had been doomed from the beginning. The federal charges against you are real, Vincent continued, addressing Brett. The evidence of your crimes is legitimate. Your bail violation and extortion attempt tonight just added to your sentence. Tommy appeared in the doorway, reporting that local police were en route, called anonymously about a domestic disturbance at the motel. Time to go, Marcus advised. Vincent looked at Brett one final time. You made this personal when you endangered Kyle. Everything that happens next is the consequence of that choice. As sirens approached in the distance, Vincent's team vanished as efficiently as they'd arrived. Brett would be returned to federal custody, his bail revoked, facing additional charges that would ensure he spent the rest of his life in prison. The evidence of his extortion attempt and kidnapping of Diane would be discovered by the responding officers, along with enough documentation to connect him to multiple federal crimes across several states. Diane would be questioned as a potential victim, though her cooperation in Brett's criminal activities would eventually surface during the investigation. Vincent had ensured that her role in gathering intelligence would be treated as coercion rather than willing participation. He had no desire to see Kyle's mother imprisoned, merely neutralized as a threat. The next morning, Vincent sat in his kitchen drinking coffee and reading news reports about Brett Hutchinson's arrest. The man who'd threatened his family was now facing multiple life sentences without possibility of parole. Justice had been served, though not through traditional legal channels. Kyle returned from the safe house that afternoon, his bags packed and his expression relieved. Is it really over? It's over, Vincent confirmed. Brett will never threaten anyone again. What about Mom? Vincent had been dreading this question. Your mother will probably face some legal consequences for her cooperation with Brett, but nothing that threatens her freedom. She made terrible choices, but she's still your mother. Kyle nodded thoughtfully. Will she try to contact us? I doubt it. She knows the conditions of the restraining order, and I think recent events have made her understand the consequences of crossing those boundaries. That evening, Vincent received a single text message from an unknown number. I understand now. I won't contact Kyle again. I'm sorry. Vincent deleted the message without responding. Diane's apology was too little, too late, and came only after she'd seen the full extent of the consequences for her actions. But it confirmed what Vincent had hoped. that she finally understood the finality of her situation. 2 weeks later, Kyle received notification that he'd been accepted to MIT with a full scholarship, his academic achievements untainted by the family drama of the past year. As Vincent watched his son read the acceptance letter, he felt the deep satisfaction of a mission completed successfully. Brett Hutchinson was serving multiple life sentences in federal prison. Diane had relocated across the country and signed a legal agreement never to contact Kyle without explicit permission from both father and son. The family business was stronger than ever, with new security protocols preventing future infiltration. Kyle was thriving academically and personally, his natural resilience strengthened by surviving his mother's betrayal. Vincent had protected his family, preserved his business, and eliminated all threats with surgical